This is the Spiritual Download. This is a channel for advanced human development, whether that be personal development or society development. Today I'm interviewing Maury Lee.
Hi there.
So I met Maury. I didn't really meet Maury personally, but I found him on Buddha at the Gas Pump. And that was a really, really good interview. And I just emailed Maury, and he said, yeah, I would love to interview. And we've actually been chatting quite a bit before this interview. So we'll have lots of things to say. But first, I'm actually going to do the interview kind of in reverse. I'm going to ask him that if he were to die next week, what would be his big words of wisdom for those who are listening in?
Well, that's a really big question, and since this is a totally spontaneous interview and nothing's been prepared, I'll just have to say how I feel about that. I guess the main thing I would say is that the bottom line is that you have to trust the universe, that the absolute, or whatever you want to call the absolute, God, whatever, that the bottom line is you don't have any alternative other than to trust that it knows what it's doing, and that whatever it's doing is good. And the reason whatever it's doing is good is because there's no other option. If you believe in the absolute or God, and that it is the creator and the source of everything, then everything in the universe that's created is of that same essence. It's just like in the Bible, it says we're created in the image of God. I think it would actually be stated better if it said that we're created with that same essence. Excuse me. My phone was telling me that I should be on this interview. So here I am. So I did it. I think after 40 years of search and reading, the bottom line is that ultimately you have to surrender to a trust that no matter what you're going through, whether it's, anxiety, depression, whatever, that ultimately that the source knows what it's doing, and whatever it's doing, whether we can actually understand it intellectually or not, that to trust that is essential. And I think once you develop that trust, the personality and how you approach life really settles down, and there's sort of an okayness about life. And I don't like it if things in my life are not perfect, or if somebody's got cancer or somebody's dying. It's still tough, but with an underlying trust that everything's okay, and there ultimately isn't a reason for concern, just gives you a lot of peace and helps you handle things better.
Yeah, that's interesting. Some people who are kind of maybe agnostic or atheist, they might see the universe as kind of random and mechanical. And yeah. So when you say trust the universe, are you saying like trust the physical universe, or more like the divine creation, or that which is creating the universe? What would you say about that?
More that the source, the creator, the intelligence behind it, call it God or Brahma, whatever, that you have to trust that whatever it's doing ultimately has a purpose, whether you personally understand it or not. And it's just a trust. It's not really faith. I think after years of searching or praying or whatever it is you do that you feel is spirituality for you. I think most people come to a point where they end up with just a deep trust, and that's what calms them down and takes away their anxiety, because they trust what's going on.
What would be a few reasons that people wouldn't trust the source of everything?
I think the biggest thing is that so many religions say God is love, and then people are experience their life and they experience a lot of things that are unloved, like from childhood they may be abused by their parents, so they're like, well, how is that love? And they get in relationships and people treat them badly or aren't faithful or whatever, and so they feel like this isn't a loving place. You know, people get hurt, people get sick, people die. You know, where is the love in this? And that's, I think a lot of people become atheists because they say, well, you guys say God is love, but what about this and what about this, and how come, you know, this happened to me and this happened to me? And so they don't feel like it's loving. But I think maybe a lot of the sages, when they say there's nothing but love and everything is loved unconditionally, it's not the kind of love that we humans tend to think of, like if somebody loves us or we love somebody. I think what they're probably actually saying is that because the source or the absolute has created everything in existence and allows whatever happens to happen, that it loves whatever is happening. So, you know, just like Nisargadatta said, you know, the sinner and the saint are just exchanging notes. You know, he was making an equivalency, and he was basically saying that the sinner and the saint are equally loved, allowed, and accepted by the absolute because it's of that essence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds a lot like what Jesus talked about as well. That no matter who you are in this active life, that there is this this unbounded like essence or foundation of everything that's going on that actually is love itself. It's not perhaps like randomness. What would you say to someone who is kind of stuck in their atheism and right now is maybe unwilling to trust that there is this God or there is this love behind the veil of everything? Yeah.
I think most atheists are actually rejecting the God image that they were given as a child or by society. I don't think that any atheist would deny that there is intelligence in nature. And even though it appears random, it has intelligence behind it, and it works according to laws and processes that are interwoven and interconnected in every way there is. So I think most atheists would believe in something like that, some power that created this, that, you know, I don't think most of them would say it's just completely accidental and makes no purpose, you know, nothing behind it, just completely random, just accidental. So I think most atheists, if they would actually start to, you know, really ponder deeply for themselves what they believe, what they consider to be the force of nature or whatever, would turn out to be God. And then I think the other thing is most atheists don't feel that God is personal. They see this whole sort of mechanical universe operating, and they just think there's nothing personal in it for them. But if they come to the point to say, well, if I'm here, you know, whether this is just a big hologram and a dream in the mind of God or something different, I can't be anything other than of the essence of that. Well, then it becomes very personal, because in essence, you are that. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Can you explain the concept of that with a capital T? Because I think we're going to use that term quite a bit Could you
Well,
explain?
that's the standard, you know, phrase from the ancient Indian sages, you know, down to the current day. To the bottom line of non-duality is that you're not separate, that you are that, you know, and that is the doer. You know, you're not the doer, you are that. So actually, it's like saying you are God in essence. And
Okay.
that's a, you know, you have to consider what that means. It doesn't mean that in your limited form as a person that you could create your own universe or create another one. In other words, you're of the essence of God, but you are not the fullness of God in your human form.
So is it kind of similar to the story of the five blind priests who are touching different parts of the elephant? At the one blind priest is saying, "Yeah, this elephant is very soft because he's touching the tail," and another priest is saying, "No, this elephant is very rough and it breathes because the other priest is touching the trunk, and another priest is touching the leg, but none of them is understanding the entire elephant. However, they are experiencing elephantness per se." So is it more like that for humans?
Yeah, I would say it's like that. When you say that when they say you are that, or if I say I am that, it's just acknowledging that I didn't create myself. I'm a created being or focal point of the source of everything. And so as that limited focal point, I just do what I do, and I have a limited, you know, as a person, as an appearance, I have limited capabilities, but I can know that I am that and trust that, and then live accordingly much more peacefully than if I thought that everything in this universe was separate and I wasn't connected to anything and I was all alone, and when I die, that's it.
Okay. So what is that essence then? Like how do we try and experience this essence that we are? Because it seems like you know, that there are chairs and cats and trees, that everything just kind of feels hard. What would have everything be? What is the essence of all things that we can connect with?
Well, I think a good metaphor would be like alphabet soup. You know, if you have alphabet soup, you have all the letters and they're floating around in this soup, and the letters are more, say, made of starch of some kind, wheat or whatever, and everything seems separate. There's separate pieces. There's pieces of carrots and vegetables, but actually everything in the soup is related because, say, the carrots are a vegetable, the wheat is a vegetable of sorts, a plant. I don't know if that's a good metaphor, but
Yeah. So should I mean, maybe we could try to get in touch with their humanness first, or do we try to, and which, I mean, humanness, you know, that would be the connection between all humans, or should we be trying to figure out what is it that's the connection of everything that we
well,
could perceive?
I think if you go deeply enough into your own self and your own psyche and your own position in the universe, you find out you're connected to everything else. So self-inquiry, I think, is a lot better than going out and trying to save the world, because the world changes when you change. It doesn't change because you're out there marching.
Yeah. So is that how you would interpret Mahatma Gandhi's phrase, "Be the change you want to see in the world"?
Yep, yep. Now he was an activist and he went out and did it, but he was doing it from that perspective, that he was being the change that he wanted to see. So he was taking the risk that he thought he needed to take to change the world. But I'm sure he did a lot of internal work before he became an activist.
And actually, what a lot of people don't know is that Mahatma Gandhi was an extremely spiritual person. I think in the West or in the United States, when you study Gandhi at school, you just learn that, yeah, he was an activist. So he kind of sounds like the people who are maybe like yelling in the streets with signs and stuff, but actually he was one of the most awakened, people in India during the time, and he actually almost met Ramana Maharshi, and that would have been a meeting of two of some of the most awakened people or beings in India at the time. Um, and because we're talking about this independence movement in India, and it's kind of July 4th time here in the United States, I wanted to ask about freedom. So how do you perceive freedom, or how have you experienced freedom in your life? And how does that compare to how most Americans perceive freedom?
Well, I think people lose their freedom because, growing up, first of all, you have to survive your own family. So if your family has certain beliefs and ideas about how a person should be, how a child should be, how you should live life, the first I think about first 7 years or so of your life, especially the first 3, you're just like in a hypnotic state, and you're just taking everything in because you have to survive in this family. And so if your family's a little bit crazy or has odd ideas, you still have to survive in that family. So you'll pick them up unconsciously and reflect them back so you can survive. And, in very societies where everybody's of one religion and one race or whatever, you probably fit in pretty easily and feel like you can connect with everybody because you all have the same values. I think in the United States, we don't have as much of that. So we sort of fall more on the materialistic side because we have such a variety of people that the one thing we can all agree on is that, we want nicer and better things. And so we're going to pursue materialism and see, what's that bumper sticker? The one who dies with the most toys is the winner. So, but I say the one that has the most toys probably missed the boat. Freedom is freedom is something that we all experience internally as we feel like we're free to be who we are or we don't. When I was growing up, I always felt that I should feel a certain way and should think a certain way. But whatever my makeup was, I never felt comfortable with anyone outside of me telling me how I should think or feel. But I really had to toe the line, to live in that environment. So I did. But as soon as I left home, it just all came crashing down. And I pretty much said, okay, I got to start from scratch and figure out, what's meaningful to me, what's good for me, what's bad for me. And essentially, I think you get a lot of freedom when you, we're going to come back to that phrase, when you realize you are that. It just gives you an automatic sense of freedom in the sense that as an appearance, as a human being with the limitations of a physical body and et cetera, and certain capabilities or a certain level of intellect, you may be limited. But if you realize you are that, it's sort of like having absolute freedom in spite of whatever limitations you have.
So if we do realize that we're actually more than the human self that we are, I mean, how much freedom do we actually have? Like, what are we capable, like, quote unquote, capable of once we see that we're more than this body?
Well, I think you can be more spontaneous because you trust that you're okay, or that you're okay, because I think it was Ramana Maharshi that just said, be who you are. Because, basically saying, God made you, he created you the way you are. What's wrong with that? So just said, be who you are. Well, if you really felt like you could be who you are, there's a lot of freedom in that.
Yeah, I've actually I had an experience like that 2 days ago, actually, where I just felt extremely free. I was just myself. And really, I think it's the opposite of like worrying about the past or the future. It's literally enjoying the moment as much as you can. And it's not about trying to enjoy. It's actually about the opposite than trying. It's about opening up to the enjoyment of the moment.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah. I think if you have that experience at least once in your life, then definitely that leads to also happiness. So how do you see the connection between big freedom and like big happiness then?
Well, I wouldn't say that I feel happy all the time or that I run around feeling happy. It's like happiness is something that seems to happen when you get what you want, or you need a new car and say you won it in a lottery. That would be happiness. What I experience most of the time is an okayness. It's just like whatever happens is okay. And there's a lot of peace in that, and calmness in that, and a lack of anxiety. And I suspect that, you know, when the sages talked about bliss, that the real meaning is peace. And it's like the Bible talks about it when it talks about the peace that passeth understanding, that biblical phrase. It's a kind of peace that comes with that trust. And now I've experienced, you know, plenty of ecstatic states and mystical experiences where, say, you feel one with everything and you don't feel separate from anything, and where giving somebody something feels exactly the same as if you were receiving it. But most people who have those experiences will tell you that they don't last, that you might have it for a few minutes, you might have it for a few hours, you might have it for a few days, a month. And I don't know if it's because you habituate to it or that that's not a practical state to be in to perform every day, but it doesn't last for most people. And I think that's an issue, because I think most people think that enlightenment or realization will come with some kind of a big bang experience, and it will be so powerful that they will know that they're enlightened. And I think the problem with that is, say they have some big bang experience and they're like totally ecstatic for a week or a month, and they're like, oh man, I've got it, I'm feeling this, whatever. And then poof, it goes away. And then all of a sudden, normal life in comparison to that experience is like, seems meaningless and boring. And then sometimes they can even go into a depression. So I think those experiences are like information, and they're supposed to tell you how things really are. Say you have an ecstatic experience of oneness and you feel like one with everything, and so you feel totally safe and secure and loving and feel certain that there's nothing but love. That's the message. And so if the experience drops away, you don't have the experience anymore, but you should keep the knowledge of that. So I think it's a learning and it's accepting of that knowledge. And so if the experience goes away, then you say, okay, what was the message of that experience? Okay, the message was that everything is love, I am love, or I'm connected to everything. And I know that even though I'm not experiencing it emotionally right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, because we were earlier talking about the essence of the universe is what we are.
Yep.
And that means that it means that we're that all of the time, right?
Yep.
It doesn't mean that we're that only during the good parts of our day or during the big experiences of our life. So is the okayness, is that the idea of settling into what we constantly are? Is that what?
Yeah, I think that's what it is. It's like, okay, if you are that, whether you're having a good day or a bad day, or if you're having a good time or a bad time, you're still that. I mean, your essence doesn't change. And so I think if you have that understanding and have grasped that really deeply, then the ups and downs, you take them a little lighter, because regardless of whether you're having this experience or that experience, you still are that. And ultimately that is what you're trusting, because what's the other option? You know, the other option is pure ego, and I'm in this world alone and I have to do everything for myself and I have to make sure everything works, because the only thing that's making this go is me. And I think that's a recipe for misery.
So is it about, are we trying to escape this me, or are we trying to more like understand it?
It's not really an escape for me. I think if someone goes deeply into their self, they will find they are that. And in other words, I don't think enlightenment is getting rid of your mind or stopping thinking or anything like that. It's more of a gestalt. And gestalt is a German word that means the interplay between background and foreground. So I think most people in their normal egoic state, they feel like that they are separate and that their primary and their main interest is their ego and what they want. But I think that enlightenment is more of a shift to where the ego sort of settles in the background as identity, and you identify more with that, the creator of the universe. When you identify as that primarily, you still need the ego to function and to know where to put your food and how to take care of yourself. But it's a much more relaxed position, because you know that the ego, your sense of self as a person, is not your primary identity. It's your functional identity, but your real identity is that. And everybody ultimately has that same ultimate identity as being that, with a particular focal point, particular abilities and attitudes and whatever. So I don't think realization is just realizing that you are that. It doesn't, it may feel when that's happening that you're losing yourself and that your ego is dissolving, and maybe you're not even thinking as much. But I think what you find is that eventually the ego is still there. It's just not primary anymore. And when it's not primary, it doesn't have the whole burden of life on itself. And I think that ties in when they say you are not the doer. You know, that's the same thing. That is the doer. You're just a focal point of that, a certain point of view of that. And everybody's got a different point of view, but they're still all the absolute or God or source or whatever.
Yeah, so it seems like people are naturally, we're kind of seekers, like we're seeking for something that we don't have right now, or that we aren't, or that we feel that we aren't yet. So a lot of people, like especially in the United States, they want to have maybe more power and more money, and maybe they feel that once they have the power and the money, they can maybe, manipulate and acquire more, and maybe they become someone like Donald Trump. But what kind of argument would you say that maybe it would be wiser to be someone like a Socrates or a Nisargadatta Maharaj versus like someone like Donald Trump or Jeff Bezos or someone like that?
Because all the competition is gone. All the struggle is gone. You know, Nisargadatta said things like, want what you have and don't want what you don't have. And, you know, to be content with what you have, and say a Nisargadatta who identified, you know, as that and knew he was that, it's like he already feels complete, already feels totally secure, already feels like everything he could possibly want, he already is. So all that clutching and grabbing and searching for the next big thing that might make them happy, all that striving is gone. So like Nisargadatta didn't have much, but is it better to not have much and be totally content, or to have billions of dollars and lots of toys and still be trying to get more? I mean, I don't need more. I drive an old car. I mean, I buy all my clothes at the thrift store. I have for 30 years. I don't really care, you know, and compared to when I was young, when I was in my 20s, I mean, I had lots of anxiety, lots of depression. But you mentioned intuition, and that's the one thing I had. I had this really deep intuition that what I was experiencing and the anxiety that I had and the depression that I had a very strong intuition that this can't be right. This can't be how I'm supposed to be, because no one would want to continue living if they were experiencing this all the time. So my conclusion was that I'm not thinking right and I'm not seeing right. There's obviously something I'm missing. And so my search was based on that intuition that whatever I'm experiencing and how I'm seeing things can't possibly be how it should be, because life wouldn't want to perpetuate itself, you know, to experience this continually. And so I just said, I've got to find out who knows something different than the way I'm seeing things and the way I'm thinking. And of course, I started reading a lot of psychology and philosophy and then spiritual literature. And when I found, you know, people talking about enlightenment and being at peace and, you know, dropping all anxiety and dropping the fear of dying, et cetera, then I pursued that. And eventually I came to say, okay, I understand it. I'm at peace now. But it doesn't mean I still don't have anxiety at times or don't feel peaceful, but those emotions don't have as much of the ups and downs have a background of peace behind them, so that they're not, it's not as disturbing.
So is that who or what you are, is the background of your life?
Well, that ultimately that's what we are, whatever that is, however you want to call it, the absolute or source or whatever. Ultimately, we are that, and that never had a beginning, right? I mean, if you want to talk about God or the absolute or the source of all this, that seems like everything in this universe, this physical universe, has a beginning and an end. But that which has always been and creates this always has been and always will be. So if you have a background, an identity that sits in the background of your personal functioning, if you have that identity that you are this eternal being or beingness, whatever, it sort of lets you know that you're already eternal. So you don't have to be saved by any preacher or any religion to be eternal. Once you realize that, you're like, I always have been and always will be. And this person that is appearing right now is an experience of that essence of itself in this particular form for a while. But since I am that, I always have been and always will be. So it's sort of like, it takes a lot of the sting out of death away because you feel eternal.
So what from your perception would happen after the body drops away and we pass away?
I can't really say for 100%, but I can also say that it doesn't matter because I trust that. So my feeling is that if we can appear for this time as a person, me as Maury and you as Kyle, if we can appear as this for now, there's no reason to believe that the person that we are, the traits or whatever, couldn't appear in another dimension or another universe and experience that. But even in another universe or another dimension, if, say, this was a learning experience on Earth and we develop certain traits and insights and personality, and then our body dies, the Hindus would say the subtle body or the soul goes to heaven, or which could be different levels of, say, if you were at a certain level of awareness and kindness and joy, you would go to a place that had other beings that were similar so that you could share. And people of a lower level of, say, development would go to another place. That could be. I mean, have you watched the videos online of people with near-death experience?
Yeah, I got really interested in that like my senior year of high school.
Yeah. So if you watch those, it's pretty hard to believe that you don't continue as this form. But what I'm trying to point out is it's very likely that we go on and still retain our personality and have a sense of a personal self and go into heaven or some other realm. And it's possible that we just become one with what we originally were. But, you know, as a person, I'm not in charge of that. And I've a long time ago decided that I just have to trust that. So I pretty much believe that I probably will go on and experience as a personal being some other dimension. But if not, it's irrelevant to me because I just trust that that knows what it's doing. And I'm not, as a person, in charge anyways. So to fight reality doesn't pay.
So some Hindus or Eastern Asian philosophers would say that you would possibly be reborn into a new body. What would you say about, I guess, reincarnation in general? And do you think that once we awaken to oneness, that we can even be reincarnated into someone who is quote unquote unawakened?
I don't know. I really don't know, but I've also watched a lot of those videos and read some books about reincarnation, and it certainly seems. And then actually with kids, like I've had 3 kids, and you know, once you have kids, you realize that, you know, kids are sort of born and one kid will pick up a pencil when they're 3 and start drawing, and you're just like blown away because they can draw so good. It's like they had 2 or 3 previous lives of being an actual artist, and they pick it up real easy. Or some other kid starts picking up instruments, and in no time they're playing the guitar or the trumpet or whatever. So you can say, oh, they just have talent. They're just physically, their genes or whatever are such that they're just a natural at that. But you could also say that maybe they came in here forgetting their past lives, but they were an artist or a musician or a philosopher in a past life. So they start out sort of blank, but they pick up that particular type of activity really quickly. So again, I'm saying, you know, once you have that deep trust that you are that, and that is doing all of this, and there's no other option but to trust that, having the exact answers of whether or not there is reincarnation, those kind of things, they're not quite as important. I mean, I'm curious about them and watch videos or read books about it, but it's not any kind of a pressing thing. And I wouldn't put a stamp and say, yes, everybody reincarnates or everybody goes to heaven. But I do feel that ultimately me, you, and everybody is eternal.
So do you believe that the source or even the universe itself is perfect? Do you perceive it as a perfection?
How can it not be perfect? Because if there's only one creator, if there's only one God, if everything is created by this one absolute, what is there to judge that this isn't good and it should be this way instead of this way? It's just like if you make a pot and you're the only person in the world and you make a pot, no matter how good or ugly it is, who's there to say it's not perfect?
I guess a lot of people would argue that because pain and suffering exists, therefore, and because if the universe is perfect, then those two couldn't be mutual, right? Like you can't have a perfection. Yeah.
But that's perfection from the human perspective, that I should never feel pain.
Right.
But from the perspective of the creator, obviously it doesn't think that way.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I listened to a podcast in which he was saying humans necessitate that suffering equals bad. And it's like kind of an automatic response. It's a visceral response that we have, like, oh, I'm in pain and that equals bad. But I've actually had many experiences, specifically depression, where it was so much suffering, yet it was actually beautiful, or I appreciated it so much, even during the time, but also coming out of that depression and seeing how much beauty there is in life, not being depressed. Now I love life so much. And there's and the reason was because I had to go through this really deep, and what it was like, yeah, it was maybe clinical depression, but I see it as even deeper, because it was like a pulling, it was like from the universe trying to pull me and out of my Kyle-ness or my meanness and being stuck, and just saying, like, look, it's like shaking me and saying, look, there's more, just open your eyes and open your ears to all of the beauty that that's going to happen to you in your life. And
it's just like your health, when you're healthy, you just accept it and you don't even realize how wonderful that is. But you get really sick for a month, throwing up and feel like crap for a month. And then all of a sudden, when you get better, it's like, whoa, now I really know what being healthy is, because you know the opposite. So I sort of agree with what you're saying, that a lot of people that have gotten to very high levels of realization, bliss, peace, or whatever, will also tell you that previously they'd gone through hell. So
what about suffering on the grand human scale, like war and famine? Can you talk kind of about your childhood experience living in the Congo, growing up in the Congo, and how does that relate to like human suffering?
I don't know how that relates to human suffering, other than, are you familiar with Dr. David Hawkins' work?
Yes.
And he talks about the different levels of consciousness. And he literally says, that different countries have different levels of consciousness. And that when people come into this world, because he's a believer in reincarnation, so he would say, people at a low level of consciousness will get born into a country that has a low level of consciousness because that's where their work needs to get done, and that's the people that they'll relate to. So anyhow, my parents were Baptist missionaries, and I went to Belgium when I think I was about 8, because to be a missionary in the Belgian Congo, because it was a colony of Belgium in the 1960s, or before the 1960s. So we had to go to Belgium first and sort of learn French and sort of learn about Belgium and who Belgians are and everything else. So every missionary, whether they were Baptist or Methodist or whatever, had to go to Belgium for a year first and learn French before they could go to the Congo. So I went to Brussels for a year, and of course I was taken from an American school, an American environment, and thrust immediately into a French school where they spoke French. And in America, we were still printing, letters like A, B, C, D. But in Belgium, they start writing cursive in the first grade. So it was a real hard time for me because didn't speak French. I was in a French school. I was still just barely learning to print, and they were already writing cursive. And not only that, at that time, they had inkwells in the corner of the desk, and you had a quill, a pen you dipped in the corner ink, and because they were trying to teach you to be neat, and you had a blotter. So it was like a big change for me. And then we went to the Belgian Congo, and my parents were assigned to a village outside the capital. So as a family, we went there, and I got to spend the summer there running around in the bush, which was a lot of fun. But then I got sent away to boarding school. So after that summer, I got sent to a boarding school in the city. So it was so I was away from my parents, couldn't see we didn't have telephones. There was no telephones. So I was very much on my own in a hostel, in a boarding school, and again, went to French school. So, when I had summers in the bush, I lived for a number of years in a place called Vanga that was on the Kwilu River, which is a very large river, and got to run around in the jungle, just all I wanted. We ran around in the jungle and killed snakes and ate bugs, and I'm surprised I'm still alive. So, but I think one thing that made me into a pretty critical thinker or a questioner was, if you're raised in one culture your whole life, it's pretty easy to get very parochial and think, well, this is the way things are. This is the way people are. This is the way people think. But as a child, if you're taken from, say, one culture to another culture and then another culture, you start to realize pretty quick that, well, Americans tend to think this is what life is about, and this is what love is, and this is what good is, and this is good taste, and then you go to Belgium and they think the Americans are all crude, and actually the way to be cultured is to, eat differently and think differently. And then you go to Africa and they're living in the Stone Age. Literally, people ate off, mangoes were everywhere. There was all kinds of fruit everywhere, all kinds. And so I could run around all day out in the bush and pick grapefruit and oranges and pineapple and papaya. And so I just hung around the natives and saw that they thought entirely different than we did. A lot of them weren't Christians. They had their own, a lot of beliefs in spirits and spells and sort of like voodoo type stuff. Yeah, it wasn't voodoo, but voodoo sort of came from Africa. But they believed that you know, somebody died, half the time they thought it's because so and so put a spell on them and things
Did they
like
have
that.
shamans?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. So
Did you ever see a shaman do some sort of like medical miracle or something like that? Or any
well,
cures?
I saw the downside of it, because for most of them, if a shaman said to a person that you've been bad, you're evil, and you're going to die, those people believed it so much that they would just almost literally have a heart attack and die. Because for them, that they believed it absolutely. Um, so things like that did happen, and I remember when they had the Simba rebellion, and the Congo was getting independence from Belgium. And I remember one day a whole bunch of natives dressed up in feathers and spears and bows and arrows and drums and everything. They came to outside in our front yard and started doing this dance and stuff. Like, you know, my dad, I'm sure, thought they were going to attack us or kill us or something, because they were armed. And he went out and spoke to the head guy, and he basically told him, he said, you know, he said, my power is more powerful than yours, and if you harm anybody in this family, you know, I'm going to put a curse on you or whatever. That was, he was giving them back the kind of thing they understood. And after he did that, then they left. And then a few days after that, the American Marines came in with a helicopter, and they had informed us over a ham radio to be on this hill at noon, and they would just evacuate us all. And so the Marines came in with a helicopter, and we were evacuated back to the United States.
So how old were you at that time?
Probably about 14, something like that.
So you lived in Africa for about 7 years?
6, 7, 8 years. Yeah, I don't have it precisely in my mind, but it was enough to really experience a very, very primitive culture. I mean, they lived in mud huts with thatched roofs, no running water.
So how do you think these people experience happiness and freedom in their lives, in extreme poverty?
Most of them seem very happy. The only thing that makes them think they're not happy is when they see all the things that other more advanced civilizations have, then they think they need to have that to be happy. But my experience of the natives was that most of them had really good self-esteem and were quite happy. Probably happier than the average American that has so much.
Do you think Americans could become happier if they like traveled to Africa for like 2 months and just kind of understood, like learned from the culture?
They might. They might. I mean, if it dawned on them that they didn't need all this stuff, and they didn't need so much stuff, that happiness in life wasn't how much stuff you have, or if you have the latest jeans or the best brand or the newest car or the best boat, or can take the most exotic vacations. I think if they realized that, they would be happier.
So the key is to kind of learn how to become less materialistic. And it doesn't quite, I mean, maybe traveling to a third world country would help a lot of, like it helped me for sure. I've been to India, Tanzania, and Ecuador. And all three of those times I've kind of realized like I don't need quite as much as I've thought. So I do think it would maybe help, but you know, as long as you maybe learn the lesson, maybe you wouldn't need to actually physically travel.
So when you were in South America, did you think that the average person you were around was happier than the average American?
No, I think from all the countries I've been to, like everyone just seems pretty happy. I don't know, kind of same level. It's just that in Ecuador, people are less happy because it's less safe.
Yeah.
Than here. But here, people are less happy because they don't feel connected with other human beings,
Yeah.
and that they're constantly feel like they need more, or they need that next thing, like you mentioned. So if somehow we can connect, like live in a safe country, but yet be less materialistic and connect with human beings, then I think then that would actually lead to more happiness for everybody. So yeah, I think happiness can increase for all humans, but it would be kind of we'd have to kind of come together and see what has worked in the past. How have humans, other human cultures become happier? And there actually is a UN study on human happiness, and some of the happiest countries in the world are like Denmark, Costa Rica, Sweden, New Zealand. And these tend to be countries that are more cohesive, so people are connected, but also it's very safe and people have enough materially. But they're not like Americans that are constantly needing more and more. I want that next truck. I want that next new pair of jeans. So
Yeah, just happier with less. I mean, you've heard the phrase "less is more,"
yes.
and there's so much truth in that. But most people don't start to realize less is more until they start to feel that their life is unmanageable, because they have 3 cars, and therefore they have 3 cars to upkeep, and they have to have a big garage because they have 3 cars, so they have to have a bigger house that's more upkeep. And they want their yard to look good, and they don't have the time to do that because they're working 10-12 hours a day, so they have to hire a gardener. And I think it takes a while for them to say, wow, if I didn't have 3 cars, I wouldn't be paying that much insurance. I wouldn't need to make as much money. I wouldn't have as many repairs. If I didn't have new cars, I wouldn't be paying as much taxes, so I wouldn't need as much money. And if I didn't have such a big house. And so at some point, I think a lot of people do realize less is more. And so it's like, do you want to have, all kinds of electronic blenders and mixers and stuff in your kitchen, or you just want to have a few knives and a few things and whip your eggs with your fork instead of with some fancy $50 mixer? So a simple life gives you more time to just be, and less things to keep up with and repair. So I'm a big believer in less is more.
I think this is a good pause point. I think we'll take a 5-minute break.
Okay.
We'll make a part 2 to this video, and I think in part 2 we'll kind of jump into your the initial stages of your spirituality or spiritual experiences.
Okay.
All right, so we'll take a 5-minute break. Stay tuned.
Okay.